I did not expect it to be a wolf that found her first. I had ruled Varanoth for 22 years and learned to distrust surprises. A king who is surprised is a king who has not been paying attention, and I had always been paying attention to the eastern border disputes, to the price of the spice roads, to the shifting loyalties of my 7-pack lords, to the slow rot in the granary stores my steward tried to hide from me for 3 seasons before I found it myself. I paid attention to everything. That was the whole of the work. So when my wolf began disappearing before dawn, I noticed on the first morning. His name was Kale. He was 12 years old, which is ancient for a wolf of his size. He stood past my hip, gray-silver along the spine and white at the muzzle, with the deep amber eyes that my father's wolf had shared before him. Kale was not affectionate. He had never been affectionate. He suffered my company with the dignity of a creature who had agreed, long ago, to a partnership of mutual usefulness, and he extended that same chilly courtesy to everyone else in Varanoth Hold. My second-in-command, Baran, had once tried to offer Kale a piece of dried venison and lost part of a finger. Kale was not cruel. He simply did not want to be touched by anyone who had not earned it, and in 12 years, he had decided that no one had. I woke the first morning to find his sleeping place empty. His scent still hung in the chamber, warm like wood smoke and river clay, but he was gone. The Hold's east gate was standing open 3 fingers' width, which meant he had let himself out, which meant he had gone somewhere deliberately. I told myself he had followed a deer. Old wolves sometimes did that, went out alone in the night to remember what they once were. He returned at mid-morning with a sprig of something tucked against his collar. It was small, blue-flowered, fragrant in the particular way of the wild herbs that grew in the lower valleys beyond the Hold wall. He dropped it at my feet, looked at me with those amber eyes, and went to his sleeping place and lay down. I looked at the sprig for a long moment. "What is this?" I said. Kale did not answer. He closed his eyes. I left the sprig on the floor and went back to my work. Border dispute, spice road tariffs, the granary report, 3rd revision. I forgot about the sprig entirely. The second morning he brought a smooth gray river stone, the size of my thumb. The third morning he brought a small bunch of dried seed pods, bound neatly with a strip of cord. Someone had tied that cord. That was not something a wolf did on his own. I picked up the seed pods and stood there in the early light from the window, turning them over in my hand. They smelled extraordinary, like warm earth and something floral underneath, a green sweetness I did not have a name for. The cord was plain, the knot simple and competent. Someone's hands had tied it. And Kale had carried it back across however many miles of flowering valley and laid it at my feet. I looked at Kale. He was already watching me. "Where are you going?" I said. He put his head back down and closed his eyes. "I am a patient man. I have sat through 3-day border councils without losing my composure. I have listened to pack lords argue over grazing rights for an entire morning without raising my voice. But there is a particular kind of patience that is really just the discipline of waiting until the right moment. And I had been a king long enough to know when the right moment had arrived. On the 4th morning, I followed him. He left before the light changed, moving without urgency, not the loping, distance-eating stride of a wolf on a hunt, but the steady, unhurried walk of a creature going somewhere it knew well. I kept far enough behind that he wouldn't turn, though I doubted he would. Kale had never once in 12 years pretended not to know exactly where I was. We went down through the Hold's lower gate, past the stable yard still dim and quiet, past the first ring of tradesmen's houses where the bread ovens were just beginning to heat, and then out beyond the wall entirely, along the old spice road that curved south toward the village of Semren. Semren was not a wealthy village. It sat at the bottom of the flowering hills, where the road from the Hold met the road from the river markets, and it smelled always of warm earth and dried herbs and the particular sweetness of the Varanoth blossoms that grew thickest in that valley. The ones my grandmother had called the Perfume Hills, the ones that gave this region its oldest name. The village had perhaps 200 souls. Most of them grew the herbs or tended the spice orchards. It was not the kind of place a king visited. Cale turned off the road before the village square and walked between 2 rows of kitchen gardens to a small house set slightly apart from the others, with bundles of drying herbs hung along its entire front, lavender and yarrow, and the blue-flowered ones I now recognized from the first morning's gift. The door was open. A lantern was burning inside. A woman was crouched in the front yard in the gray pre-dawn light. She had not heard me yet. She was focused entirely on Cale, who had walked straight to her without hesitation, and she was unwinding a strip of linen from his right foreleg, competent, unhurried hands, speaking to him under her breath as she worked. "There," she was saying, "that's almost healed. Another 3 days and you won't need this at all. You are the most dramatic patient I have ever had, for your information. Every other wolf I've tended would have licked this clean by now. You just sit there looking at me like you're waiting for something." Cale, who had bitten Baran's finger for offering him dried venison, was sitting with perfect stillness while she rewrapped the leg. "I know you're hungry," she continued, reaching beside her without looking and producing a piece of dried meat from a clay pot. "I know you're always hungry. You're 12 years old and you act like nobody feeds you." She offered it on her open palm. Cale took it with extraordinary gentleness. "Good morning," she said, as if she'd been waiting to say it. "Now hold still for the knot." I had not moved. I was standing perhaps 10 yards behind Cale, in the gap between the kitchen gardens, and the light was still too gray for her to have seen me easily. I was, and I will not dress this up, standing still because something had happened to my chest. It was not pain. It was closer to recognition, like arriving somewhere after a very long journey and understanding, without being told, that this was the place you had been traveling toward. I had felt the mate bond once before, when I was 23, a flare and then a fade, because the woman was already gone from Varanoth before I could name it, married into a northern pack before my father's council thought to tell me such things were possible. I had not felt it since. I had stopped expecting it. I had ruled for 22 years and made my peace with the particular loneliness of a king who has not found his mate, and I had decided, somewhere around my 40th year, that perhaps this was simply my nature, a man built for governance rather than devotion. The warmth behind my ribs said otherwise. Cale finished his piece of dried meat. He looked over his shoulder at me, and I could have sworn, in that moment, that the expression on his old face was something between vindication and mild contempt. He had been bringing me evidence for 4 days. Apparently he had run out of patience. The woman knotted the linen. She patted Cale's head once, gently, and Cale, who had never in 12 years allowed anyone to pat his head, went completely still and let her. She stood, brushing her hands on her apron, and turned to reach for something on the bench by the door. And then she saw me. She did not startle badly. She took one quick step back, assessed me for a moment with calm, dark eyes, and then, apparently deciding I was not immediately dangerous, said, "Good morning. Are you lost?" It was, I realized, the first time anyone had asked me that in 22 years. "No," I said. "You're with him," she said, nodding at Cale, who had settled into the dirt beside the bench with the ease of an animal who had been doing this for some time. I wondered. He started coming about 2 months ago, just turned up at my gate one morning with a cut on his leg. I patched it. She tilted her head, studying me. "He's yours." "He is." "He didn't tell me that." She looked at Cale. "You didn't tell me that." Cale looked back at her without apology. "Well," she said, and turned back to me. "The leg is healing well. The cut was deeper than it looked, but wolves heal fast if you keep it clean and don't let them lick it. He has been mostly cooperative about that, though he makes his feelings known." "He makes his feelings known generally," I said. Something shifted at the corner of her mouth. Not a smile yet, the possibility of one. I noticed, He's particular. Most of the wolves I tend let me handle them without much ceremony. This one watches everything." She studied me again, unhurried. "You walked down from the hold." "I did. It's early for that." "I was following my wolf," I said. "He's been leaving before dawn." "To come here," she said it without guilt. "I didn't know he was going back. I assumed he slept somewhere nearby. I would have told someone if I'd known whose wolf he was." She paused. "Who are you?" I told her. She received this information without the drop of her expression that usually followed the sudden careful attention, the shift into formality. She looked at me for a moment, then looked at Kale, then looked back at me. "He brought you gifts," she said. "Those were for you." "Yes." "He took them from my garden." She sounded more amused than offended. "Every few mornings something was missing. I assumed it was mice." She reached up to touch one of the dried herb bundles hanging from her eaves. "Well, he has interesting taste." "My name is Aldrich Vane," I had said. "Alpha King of Varanoth," and she had said, "He brought you gifts." "Not my lord, not, I apologize for any trouble. Not, of course I should have sent word immediately, how careless of me, forgive me. Just, he brought you gifts." "What is your name?" I said. "Senna," she said, "of Semren, though there are 3 other Sennas in Semren, so that is not always useful." The possibility of a smile had become a real one now, brief and warm. "The herbalist Senna, if that helps." "It helps," I said. She invited me inside for tea. I accepted. I am not entirely sure why a king does not accept invitations from village herbalists at dawn without some thought, and I had done no thinking at all. I had simply walked through her door because she had opened it. Her house was small, clean, and smelled tremendously of herbs. They hung from every beam. The walls had shelves of clay pots and small wooden boxes, each labeled in a precise hand. The fire had been burning for some time. The coals were deep red, the kettle already heating. She moved through the space without ceremony, pulling down a small tin and measuring into a plain clay pot, and I sat at her table because there was a chair there and she had not told me not to. Kale came inside and lay down under the table. He had done this before. That was clear. "He's never done that," I said. "Come inside somewhere." "He seems to like it here," she said. She poured water. "He started staying longer each time. I didn't mind. I work alone mostly. It's quiet company." She set the pot on the fire. "He watched me work. He seemed interested in it." "Kale has never been interested in anything I do," I said. "What do you do?" "Govern." Well, she considered this. "That might be the difference. He probably can't help with governing. He can watch me sort seeds." I looked at the old wolf under my chair. He appeared to be asleep. "He bit my second in command," I said. "The first week I had him, took part of a finger." "That does sound like him," she agreed, unbothered. "He has strong opinions about being touched. Most older wolves do. They've learned that people reach for them without asking." She glanced at me. "Did your second in command ask?" "He offered venison." Reaching, not asking. She lifted the pot from the hook and poured. "He asks here, that's probably why." She set a cup in front of me. It was plain clay, slightly uneven at the rim, warm from the fire. It smelled like something green and bright. "Pepperwort and morning bloom," she said, "for waking up. It won't taste like what they serve at the hold, I expect." "What do they serve at the hold?" "I've never been," she said simply. She sat across from me. "I've seen the road up." She had lived in Semren her whole life. She had taken over her mother's trade when her mother died, 11 years ago, and had expanded it. Now she tended half the village's medicinal needs, trained 2 apprentices, and supplied dried herbs to the markets in the next 3 settlements. She told me this without particular pride and without false modesty, the way a person describes work they have been doing long enough that it has simply become who they are. I asked questions. She answered them. She asked a few back, not about governance, not about politics, not about what it was like to be a king. She asked about the Hold's herb gardens, which she'd heard were mostly decorative, and whether the kitchen staff dried their own or bought from the markets, and what I actually ate for breakfast. I told her. She looked vaguely disapproving about the breakfast, which she apparently found insufficient. Kale slept under the table. When the light had fully changed and the village was beginning to wake, I stood and thanked her. She walked me to the door. In the yard, she stopped beside the bench and looked up at me. She was shorter than me by nearly a full head, something I had not noticed until we were standing level in the open air, and said, "Your wolf can keep coming if that's all right with you. The leg will need 2 more changes of linen. After that, it's healed." "After that," I said. She tilted her head. "After that he'll come if he likes and stay away if he likes. I won't turn him out either way." She glanced at Kale, who had appeared silently at my side. "He knows his own mind." I walked back up to the Hold with my old wolf beside me and the warmth still present behind my ribs, and I did not speak all the way up the road. Biran was waiting at the gate with 3 reports that needed my seal before mid-morning. I sealed them. I attended the council session. I read the Eastern Border Dispatch and composed a reply. And I thought about the way she had said, reaching, not asking. The way she'd said, "He knows his own mind." The way the warmth had not faded, not by so much as a degree, since the moment she had looked up and seen me standing in her garden. I went back to Semren 3 days later. I told myself it was because Kale needed the linen changed. Kale could have walked there alone, and both of us knew it. She was in the yard when we arrived, tying fresh bundles of something yellow-flowered. She glanced up when we came through the gate, looked at Kale's leg, said, "Right on time," and went inside. We followed. I had told no one where I was going. That was unusual. A king's movements are generally accounted for practical reasons of security and governance. But I had left before Biran was awake, and I had walked down the Spice Road in the early light with Kale, and when I arrived at her yard, it occurred to me that I had not given it a thought. She changed the linen. She asked Kale how he'd been sleeping. She offered him the dried meat, and he took it with the same extraordinary gentleness, and then she offered me tea without asking whether I wanted it because she had apparently decided that I did. I sat at her table. I drank the tea. She sorted seeds into small clay pots and told me about the season's herb harvest, which had been unusual, a wet spring making the mountain yarrow late and the river bloom early, and I listened with more attention than I had given a council report in months. I came back 2 days after that, then 3 days after that. On the 4th visit, I sat at her table for 2 hours. Kale was fully healed by then. She had announced this on the 3rd visit, with a kind of professional satisfaction, the way she announced all things she was pleased about, but he came anyway, and I came anyway, and we all seemed to understand this without saying so. On the 5th visit, she asked me whether I had ever helped transplant a seedling. I told her that I had not. She handed me a small wooden implement and showed me what to do. I transplanted seedlings for an hour and a half. My hands were dirty. A king's hands are not generally dirty in this particular way. It was, and I considered this as I worked, the most useful I had felt in quite some time. "You're good at this," she said, which surprised me, and then, "You're patient. Most people rush the root." "Most things reward patience," I said. "Yes," she said, "most." She looked at the seedling tray and then at me with a mild, considering expression that I had come to recognize. It was the look she gave things she was thinking carefully about before speaking. "Why do you keep coming?" I looked at her. She looked back, unhurried, waiting. "I find I want to," I said. She received this the same way she received everything, without alarm, without performance. She considered it for a moment, then looked back at the seedling tray. "All right," she said, as if that were a perfectly sufficient answer. In 22 years of governance, I had made thousands of decisions. I had negotiated border treaties and resolved blood feuds, and managed the succession questions of 3 neighboring pacts. I had always known what I was doing and why. I am a man who does not act without understanding his own reasons. I understood my reasons now. That was the problem. I understood them completely, and I did not know what to do with that understanding, because the warmth behind my ribs had been there for 3 weeks, and it had not varied by a degree, and I had sat in my own council chamber one morning and realized that I was thinking about dried seed pods and the way she'd said, reaching, not asking. Kale, for his part, had stopped even pretending to sleep in my chamber. He went to Semren every morning now. He came back in the evenings. I knew, because I had checked, that he slept under her table. My wolf had moved in with the village herbalist. He had done this calmly and without asking me about it. I thought about what she had said. He knows his own mind. It was Biran who told me about the elder. I had not told Biran about Semren. I had not told anyone. But a king walking down the spice road 6 times in 3 weeks with his famous wolf is not invisible, and Biran had pieced it together with the competence that made him good at his work. Halder's been in Semren, Biran said, on a morning in the 5th week, setting a dispatch on my table with a particular controlled neutrality that meant he was managing his own reaction to something. Halder was the eldest of my pack elders, a man of 70, strict and precise in his understanding of pack law, and not a man given to visiting southern villages without a reason. He requested a register of unbonded women in the lower settlements, from the village recorder. I looked at Biran. He's assessing suitability, Biran said, under the old pairings law. He has the right technically. It hasn't been invoked in 40 years, but it's in the charter. An elder may assess any unbonded woman in pack territory against the standard of the mating threshold. He paused. The standard includes age. I set down the document I was holding. The pairings law was old, older than my father's time, older than my grandfather's. It had been written in an era when a pack's survival depended on regular bonded pairings, when an elder could declare a woman who had not bonded by a certain age unsuitable for the pack ledger, which meant she could not be formally recognized in a bond, could not receive the hold's protection in a dispute, could not access the pack records for inheritance or land. It was, in its original form, a law about resource allocation. In practice, it had become something else, a way of sorting women who had been overlooked into a category that made them easier to continue overlooking. Senna was 38 years old. She had told me this on the 2nd visit without apology when I had asked. The mating threshold under the old law was 35. When does he go? I said. Tomorrow morning, Biran said. He's already sent word to the village recorder to have the register ready. I looked at Kale, who had come home that evening and was lying by the fire. He looked back at me. Cancel my morning, I said. I walked to Semren before the light changed. I had not told Biran where I was going, though I suspected he knew. I had not sent a guard ahead, had not sent any word at all. I had dressed as I would for any council session, not in ceremony, but in the plain authority of a king who does not need ornament to be recognized. And I had walked down the spice road with Kale beside me, and I had arrived at the village square just as Elder Halder was settling himself at the recorder's table with the official register open before him. There was a small gathering already. Village mornings in Semren tended to collect the curious. 2 women stood near the well. 3 men leaned against the market wall. The recorder, a small anxious man named Fent, was adjusting his pen with the expression of someone who desperately wished he were somewhere else. Senna was standing before the table. She was not frightened, or if she was, she had declined to show it, and with her that distinction was impossible to read from the outside. She stood with the same unhurried composure she brought to transplanting seedlings and tying herb bundles and handing a king a cup of tea. She had her hands folded at her waist. She looked at Halder with the calm attention she gave everything, and waited. Senna of Semren, Halder said without preamble, herbalist, 38 years of age, unbonded. Yes, she said. The standard of the pairings law is 35, he said. He had the voice of a man who believed deeply in the justice of what he was doing. An unbonded woman past the threshold who has not sought formal placement on the pack ledger is presumed unsuitable by default. This assessment exists to formally confirm that presumption and to release your record from the. That's enough. I had not intended to say it at particular volume, but something about the word presumed, the finality of it, the comfort of it, the way Halder had said it, the way people say words they have said many times before and stopped thinking about, had done something to the composure I had been maintaining for 3 weeks. Halder turned. The recorder turned. The small gathered crowd turned. Senna turned last, and her expression when she saw me did something I had not seen it do before. It went very still. I walked across the square to the table. Cale walked beside me. When I stopped, I was standing between Halder and Senna, and I was close enough that Halder could see my face clearly. "My lord," Halder said. He was not a man given to surprise either, but he was managing it now. "I was conducting a routine." "I know what you were conducting," I said. "Close the register." A pause. "My lord, the pairings law gives the elder council the right to." The pairings law gives the elder council the right to assess suitability against the mating threshold, I said. It does not define suitability by age alone. It also recognizes the mate bond as a superseding claim, and the mate bond is a matter of fact, not assessment. I looked at Halder. "Close the register." He closed it. The square was very quiet. The 2 women by the well had stopped moving entirely. Fent, the recorder, appeared to have stopped breathing. I turned to Senna. She was looking at me with that particular attentive expression, the one she gave things she was thinking carefully about before speaking. There was something in it I had not seen before. Not alarm, not performance. Something quieter, like the moment before a word is said that cannot be taken back. "The mate bond," she said. Her voice was steady. "You're telling me you felt it." "The morning I came to your yard," I said, "when you looked up." She was quiet for a long moment. The village square was so still that I could hear the flowering hills behind the houses, the faint movement of warm air through the blossoms, the old sweet smell of Varanoth, southern valleys that had given this land its oldest name. The land of many perfumes, my grandmother had called it, the place where things came to fruit. "I didn't know," she said. "I know." "You didn't say." "No." She looked at me with those dark, considering eyes. "Why not?" This was a fair question. I had asked it of myself in my better moments of honesty and arrived at the same answer each time. "Because I am a king," I said, "and I had decided some years ago that a king does not feel things he cannot govern, and I could not govern this. So I came back 7 times and transplanted seedlings and thought that perhaps that was enough." Something shifted in her face, not the smile, something older and quieter than that. "That," she said, "is an extremely foolish way to think about it." "Yes," I said. "I know." "You were reaching," she said, "instead of asking." Behind me, the elder and the recorder and the gathered crowd of Semren were witnesses to the Alpha King of Varanoth being gently corrected by a village herbalist. I did not look away from her. "I'm asking now," I said. She was quiet. The flowering hills moved in the warm air. Cale sat at my feet and looked up at us both with the patience of a creature who had been waiting for this particular conversation for 5 weeks and had never once doubted it would arrive. "All right," Senna said, "but not here, not in the square." She looked at the gathered crowd, and there was a kind of warmth in that look, not apology, just acknowledgement, the way she acknowledged all things. "Come to my door." Without the ceremony, she glanced at Halder, at the closed register, at the small frozen tableau of the village square. "Come when you want to come, not because an elder is watching, and ask me yourself." "I'm coming tonight," I said. "Then come tonight," she said. I walked back to the hold. I attended the council session. I signed the Eastern Border Papers and reviewed the Granary Ledger, third revision, which was finally accurate. I had a conversation with Baran that consisted mostly of him looking at me with a carefully arranged expression of professional neutrality while I told him what had happened in the square, and concluded with him saying, in a tone of great restraint, "I'll prepare the relevant documentation," which was Baran's way of expressing relief. That evening, when the hold had settled into its after-dinner quiet, I walked down the Spice Road alone. No guard, no herald, no ceremony. Kale was already in Semren. He had not returned from his morning visit, which surprised no one, least of all me. The night was warm. The flowering hills were dark shapes against a sky thick with stars, and the smell of the southern valleys came up on the wind the way it always did in the evenings, sweet and deep and particular, the smell of a place that had been making things bloom for a very long time. I walked to her gate. Her lantern was burning. I knocked. She opened the door. She had been working. There was a smudge of something green on her wrist, and she was still holding a small knife she'd been using to trim stems. She looked at me for a moment, and then she looked past me at the empty road, and something in her face went very still and then very warm. "You came alone," she said. "I came alone." She stepped back to let me in. Kale was under the table. He lifted his head when I entered, regarded me with amber eyes that had seen me at my worst and my best and my most foolish, and put his head back down. I stood in her small house that smelled of herbs and warm fire and everything she was, and I looked at her. "Senna of Semren," I said, "the mate bond is real, and it is mine and it is yours, and I would like very much to stop pretending I came here for the seedlings." She set the small knife down on the bench. She looked at me with those dark, unhurried eyes, and for a moment she was entirely still in the way she went still before saying something she had decided mattered. "All right," she said. It was the same 2 words she always used, but the warmth in them was different now, complete, settled, the warmth of something that had been waiting to be named and had finally been named. "All right. Come in properly then. I'll make tea." I sat at her table. Kale was under it. She made tea. The lantern burned. The flowering hills were dark and sweet outside the window, and the mate bond sat in my chest like a hearth fire that had finally been given enough wood to burn without tending. We were bonded on a morning in late autumn, when the spice orchards had gone gold, and the blue-flowered herbs at her eaves had given their last blooms of the season. It was not a ceremony of great spectacle. Senna had made her feelings about spectacle plainly known, and I had, by then, learned to listen carefully to plainly known feelings. The witnesses were Baran, the village recorder Fent, 3 of the village's elder women who had known Senna's mother and appeared deeply satisfied by the occasion, and Elder Halder, whose presence I had required as a point of honesty rather than triumph. He signed the ledger without comment. His face, when Senna received the formal bond marking without any of the fuss a different woman might have made, was the face of a man quietly revising an assumption he had held for 40 years. I had not required him there to humiliate him. I had required him there because I believed, and still believe, that the people who write the registries should sometimes have to watch what the registries miss. Kale attended. He sat between us during the formal words, which no one in the history of Varanoth had ever had their wolf do, and which my grandmother's histories confirmed was actually very old pack custom. The wolf witness, they had called it in the old tongue, that had been forgotten somewhere in the centuries between. We had not forgotten it. Kale apparently had always known. After the witnesses left, we walked home, her home, now also mine. We had discussed this with the same practical directness she brought to all discussions, and she had said, with that familiar mild look, that a king could live wherever he liked, but she was not leaving her herb bundles, and I had said that I would govern from wherever she was, which turned out to be a simpler decision than 22 years of governance had led me to expect simple decisions to be. We walked home along the spice road, through the gold afternoon light of the Orchard Valley, and the flowering hills were mostly gone to seed now but still sweet with the last of the autumn warmth. And Cale walked between us, not at heel, not at her side, but between the way he would walk for the rest of his days, steady and untroubled, a wolf who had known something before the two of us had known it ourselves and had simply continued patiently, leaving evidence. On the bench by her door, where she had once crouched in the gray pre-dawn light and rewrapped his leg while calling him dramatic, there was a single sprig of blue-flowered herb, fresh, as if cut that morning. Senna picked it up. She looked at Cale. He looked back at her with the amber eyes of a wolf who had given an accounting of himself to no one in 12 years and had no intention of starting. "He's been coming here 6 weeks before you did," she said. "I know," I said. "He found me first." "He did," I said. "He always had better instincts." She turned the sprig over in her fingers, looking at it with that quiet, unhurried expression that was, I understood now, simply how she looked when she was happiest. Nothing dramatic, nothing performed, just the world as it was, accepted completely. "We should dry it," she said. "Put it in one of the labeled pots, for the record." "What would you write on the label?" I said. She considered for a moment. Then she said, "The beginning." I held the door open. She went inside. Cale went in after her, and I went in after him, and the door closed on the warm smell of herbs and the last light of the Orchard Valley, and somewhere in the hills the autumn wind moved through the old sweet blossoms of the land of many perfumes, and the hearth fire inside needed no tending at all.